Welcome to the CBS Chicago special presentation, Chicago Decides. I'm Joe Donlon. Less than 2 weeks now, voters will go to the polls and we'll count those votes. It is a crowded field, 9 candidates altogether, including the incumbent, Mayor Lori Lightfoot. Joining us to discuss the candidates and key issues, Alderman Leslie Hairston, who decided not to run, 24 years? What it's been?
Yes.
All right, and also Sylvia Puente with the Latino Policy Forum. We're thrilled to have both of you with us on election night and as we lead up to election night to talk about some of the candidates and the issues. Leslie, let's start with you. A lot's happened in the week since you and I talked last, including some shifting with the targeting, I guess you could put it that way.
Yes.
Let's start with a status check from both of you, starting with you, Leslie. Where are we now, less than 2 weeks out?
Well, I think we're still seeing the shifts, right? We're seeing the shifts. We're seeing the change in messages. We're even seeing the change in outfits, if you will. I noticed some of the candidates are wearing more red, red ties, red outfits. So I pick up on different things. You know, I also see the messaging in the commercials changing.
How so?
I think there's one where Brandon Johnson and Paul Vallis, or is it Chewy, are targets in the same commercial. So that's what
a Lightfoot commercial, I believe.
I believe so.
Yeah.
I believe so.
All right, so
one more.
Okay.
I believe that we saw Alderman Sophia King has a commercial up now. So you know we're seeing changes.
You thought the last time we talked that there were any one of 4 or 5 who could get through. Sylvia, where do you think we stand now, less than 2 weeks out?
Yeah, I think it's still tight, but my organization worked with the Northwestern Center on Diversity and Democracy to release a poll that just came out yesterday that in particular looked at the preferences of Black and Latino voters. The top line, though, is I think what we've been seeing all along. This particular poll that surveyed 643 people likely to vote had Vallis at 19%, Garcia at 17%, and Lori at 14%. And I think they're the top 3, and I think we've seen that in other polling. But what's really interesting about this poll is that we know that Chicago is a very segregated city, but I was actually heartened to see that there's a fair amount of that people aren't necessarily lining up behind their quote-unquote person of their same race or ethnicity. And by that, what I mean is that 25% of white voters said they were likely to vote for Vallis. 23% of Black voters said they were likely to vote for Lori, for Mayor Lightfoot. And we know we have a very crowded field of African-American candidates running. But to me, somewhat surprisingly, only 40% of Latino voters said that they were likely to vote for Congressman Garcia. So we don't see the majority of Latinos saying they're going to vote for Garcia at this point. We don't see the majority of Blacks or whites saying they're going to vote for Lightfoot or for Vallis. And that, I think, is different and new news that we haven't seen in some of the other, all the polling that's been going on around this election.
It is interesting, Leslie, because I think especially the Black vote is considered this sort of monolithic, unified, singular vote. And that's not the case, especially this year and this cycle, because you have 7 Black candidates. And I've noticed, correct me if I'm wrong here, it seems like Lori Lightfoot has sort of conceded that Vallis is going to get through. Now she has to focus on how she gets through in a crowded field. We even saw Willie Wilson on that graphic as well, who's in the mix here. But Brandon Johnson seems to be getting a lot of attention from Mayor Lightfoot and also others like Jamal Green.
Well, I think the mayor, you know, if I was in the mayor's position, I would be focusing on my race and my race only. I would not be worrying about what the other people were doing. That's the thing. She's got to get in this. She's got to get those numbers. She's got to get that message out there. And she's got to either not get into a runoff or be in the runoff. Those should be her goals right about now. The other people that need the name recognition, so you've got, you know, Chewy has some, you don't know whether that's good or bad. Vallis has some, you don't know whether it's good or bad because they've also got histories here in the city of Chicago. So, you know, some people may associate, you know, Vallis with privatizing the schools, you know, so there's so many different things. I know that Chewy at first was just trying to align himself, you know, with Harold Washington. I see him not moving away from that, but recognizing that it's been several decades, and you need to move on and be relevant to today, not way back in the past. I think Brandon is still, pushing, he's got to get the name recognition. He's got he has to do the sale.
Why is everyone attacking him all of a sudden?
I think he's surging a little bit. I think he's incredibly articulate. I went to a mayoral forum on the South Side, sponsored by the Community Renewal Society, and I went with a friend of mine who's plans to vote, but certainly does not follow politics. Mm-hmm. And 5 of the 9 candidates were there, so she really was there to hear and to learn. And when she said to me, Sylvia, given the level of rhetoric and divisiveness at the national level in politics, it is so refreshing to hear that the 5 candidates that were there, she said there were so many good ideas. There's an abundance of good ideas, and it was so refreshing to see that they're not bickering. And each of them, so, to someone who is...
Who were the 5 that were there?
Oh, well, you're going to have to think. So Mayor Lightfoot was not there, but it was Garcia, it was Brandon, it was Sophia, it was Cam, and it was Brandon. Did I get that right, the 5?
I think you said Brandon
you
twice.
said
Did I say
Brandon twice.
Okay, then who was the other candidate that was there? Jamal.
Okay.
Jamal. So those were the 5, right, that were there.
Okay.
And so to someone who's going to vote but isn't paying attention, isn't reading all the news, she walked away saying, they all had great ideas. I don't know politics the way you do, Sylvia, but I think I could be happy with any of them, which I just thought was, from someone who's not in the weeds the way we are, that was encouraging. And she said, I'm actually glad you brought me because it sort of reaffirmed my hope in the democratic process and in the number of good people who want to make good, positive change for Chicago.
Well, I think that touches on something that we talked about last time, and looking at the values that the different candidates bring, was one of the reasons that if somebody actually listened to them, if they got the airtime that some of the moneyed ones get, you would hear a lot of good ideas, a lot of good thoughts, and some of these are from people that are, have been in council,
right.
that actually know how the city works. The other candidates don't know.
What does this break on, do you think, Leslie? I mean, if the 4 front runners, if you will, weren't at the particular forum you mentioned, because there's been plenty of bickering at the ones where they all were.
Well, yes, I think.
But having said that, what does this break on? When people who are undecided or people who haven't made quite a decision or they're still thinking, what 1 or 2 issues will break the election for them, do you think, when they go in there and actually decide who they're going to vote for?
I think their quality of life. What they can imagine life would be like under a certain administration. Again, where they line up on values that a particular candidate have.
Do you really think there's a lot of value difference? I mean, I think there are subtle differences, but do you really think there's a lot of overt value differences between the candidates?
Well, no, but I use the word value because the word progressive has been taken so far out of context that I think that it has been misleading in the past, and so now I use the word value.
I see what you're saying. Okay, got it.
Because you've got some candidates that they're all progressive, right? Just ask them. But some are way to the right, some are way to the left. So the word that I came up with is value.
All right, so let's talk about some specific issues, though, Sylvia, that your poll did dive into. What are people telling you they're worried about?
Well, the number 1 and 2 issues are no different than I think in every other poll. Crime and how we address crime was the overwhelming top priority issue of all the people that were polled. And that was followed by a close second with how are we dealing with just the basic economy of inflation and cost of living. So those were the 2. But one of the interesting questions that we asked was, are you around reducing the police investment as long as we address the root causes of violence? Right?
So reducing, I mean, this is the tricky thing about defunding and reducing
yes, we didn't
police
say
funding.
Defund the
right.
police.
You said reduce, what did you say?
Yeah, let me make sure I got it right. So give me just a second. We said decrease police funding and invest in addressing root causes of crime.
And how did that so they were asked, do you support this?
Right. Do you strongly support, oppose, strongly oppose?
And where did that fall?
Right. And altogether, 2/3 of voters pretty much across all races and ethnicities said, we totally support decreasing police funding and investing in the root causes of crime. Now, that did vary with blacks and Latinos, over 70% of them responding yes to that question, and about 57% of whites responding to that question. So we do see some racial differentiation there, and that was one of the areas among all the issues we asked about where we did see some of the widest disparity in doing that. But we also asked...
Well, that matches the segregation here in the city of Chicago.
Right.
And the communities that have not been that have been invested in,
Totally.
of course, their role that they see the police in is totally different than those communities that the city has not invested in, and the roles that the police has played here in the city of Chicago, which is linked to, we ended up with the consent decree because the practices of the Chicago Police Department here in the city of Chicago, it makes a difference where you live.
And that was one of the ones, like we asked other basic questions. Should we invest in homelessness? Should we invest in childcare? Should we invest in schools? And, the overwhelming majority of voters in Chicago said yes, and there was very little differentiation by race or ethnicity. But this is one of the questions where we saw the
That was
widest
good.
difference.
But here's the other thing about schools. I mean, schools are the key to communities. So in the areas that I represent, South Shore, Woodlawn, even Hyde Park, the communities were built where there's a school in the middle, an elementary school, and then housing all around it. And I think if you look at that, so that is intentional. And what we do know is that we look at families where people want to send their schools. Schools are the attractors of families.
It's interesting to break it down like that because the voters are saying on one hand they want crime addressed. On the other hand, they're saying they're open to the idea of changing the funding and focusing on the root cause of violence. How does that play on the ground in reality if you were still on the council?
Well, I think that's what the council has been trying to do. I think, and I think under this administration, they have not released the money. So we talk about the violence interrupters, we talk about the different programs that we have to deal with that, investing in after-school programs, things to keep youth busy. When you are slow in releasing those funds or not releasing those funds, that means there's nothing being done on the ground. Or when you are funding organizations because they have a name and they don't necessarily know the communities, that has been a lot of the criticism that has been, leveled towards the mayor, because you have groups that are not from communities that are trying to come in and make a difference in the community, and they're not going to because they lack the relationships.
They lack the relationship and they lack the trust.
Yes.
I've also heard groups that aren't applying for some of those resources because they're some of the smaller nonprofits, and just the way administratively it works makes it very difficult to finance because they only get reimbursed, and that means they have to put all the money out up front, and then the city's slow to pay. And they're like, that's financially...
They can't afford that.
Exactly.
And so that's by design, right? They know that this isn't going to happen. I mean, if you've got one non-for-profit that has, their corporate headquarters downtown here, and they've got a whole separate division that does grants and things like that, they can do that. The smaller ones, they've got to run day to day, and they can't. They don't have the administrative resources to fill these out. So, you do what you do. You're an expert. If I'm an expert at reaching out to the young people and talking to them, that doesn't mean that I have additional skill set to be a grant writer.
Right.
So, we need to provide the administrative support for these local, I'm going to call organizations, instead of giving the money to the one that writes the best proposal, because they don't necessarily know the communities. That's what I found.
And we don't know often, we're getting a little bit in the weeds here and talking about administration and grants disbursement and all, but it really is important to think about that in terms of the capacity. And you said, what does this mean for people on the ground? How do we have more youth services, right? How do we have more closing off the block to have basketball tournaments? How do we have Friday nights movies in the summer, right? How do we really keep our youth engaged, right? It doesn't just happen overnight. It doesn't just happen by magic. There's got to be an organization or someone that really is a catalyst for organizing that, for funding that, for making that happen.
Well, Lightfoot used the term defund to attack Johnson in one of the more recent forums. This is a point she's made to go after him on, along with taxes, which he's denying as far as raising taxes on folks making more than $100,000. But this is one of Lightfoot's points against Johnson, is that he's in favor of defunding the police.
I've seen that. I don't know that to be the case, but again, that's because he is from the outside looking in. You know, it's part of the mantra, the march that has been going on the past 4 years.
And I don't know if he's per se said it, but some of the organizations that are endorsing him,
Yes.
I think, have pretty been strident and adamant in saying, defund the police. They've been pretty strident.
And those are some of the far left organizations that
saying we should, you know, all the different level of tax. But he did release a proposal that called for raising $1 million or a lot more money with a lot of new different kinds of funding schemes. I don't remember all of what those were, but one of them was taxing people who are wealthier.
Well, but then you have to define wealthy. I mean, you know, in this day and age, and I think they're a little bit off when the numbers that they use to assume wealth. That would be thing. But back to the police thing and the funding the police. So I think you also need to look at how those funds are spent.
Yeah, that's
so
the bigger
for
question.
example, crime, the solution to crime is not raising the bridges over the Chicago River. Okay, that is not the solution. Nor is the solution having a squad car from Roosevelt Road all the way down to Oak Street on every block, sitting all day with the blue lights going around. That is not making anybody safe. That is not helping people in the communities that you live in the communities that I live in. And so when you talk about utilizing your resources, that's what you need to look at. That's what you need to, when you're talking about funding, right? Because most of the police budget is for salaries and wages. You know, and people don't ever want to talk about that, but that is what a majority of that budget is like.
So I wanted to turn the conversation a little bit to two other questions that
Sure.
we asked at the poll, if I could, that for real give me a lot of hope in terms of how the majority of the city who are black.
Before you get to that,
Sure.
can I just say one more thing about the police, because I also think that this is important. You know, we are under a consent decree.
Yes.
So the police are going to have some training. They need that, and that needs to be funded, even though they're doing it slow.
The city's been missing their deadlines.
They've been missing their deadlines, and so that is key, and that's key to how the police interact with black and brown communities here in the city of Chicago.
Right.
So we need to make sure that that gets ramped up so that they are meeting those deadlines.
Agreed.
Okay.
And I don't know if you know, I mean, having been an alderman for all these years, why has the police department not met the deadlines of the consent decree? I mean, it's been in
because they don't want to.
Now? Thank you.
I mean, you know,
So it's not an issue of resources so much. It's
you
an
can
issue
get
of
the
political
resources.
will. It's an
Who would
issue-
not give you the resources?
Okay.
You can't claim to care about people's lives on the one hand and then do nothing to advance it. And I think that's where politicians are guilty, right? Because you're just talking the talk.
Who do you think is the best candidate, Leslie, to take on the police issue and the issue of crime?
That's a good question.
Oh man, I don't know that I can answer that one. I think we can all agree that it is a challenge, and it's going to continue to be a challenge. And yes, the police can make a difference.
Well, no.
But it also is, how do we get to the root causes? How do we give our youth hope? How do we give them things to be doing to keep them occupied and giving them hope of having a better future?
Well, I think, and I agree with you on that. I think that it's important for us to make sure we know what the solution is, but yet we are trickling it out. We're taking an eye drop and dropping it. We know what to do. We need to do it full and robust. And I don't think I've heard any of the candidates, talk. Well, I think I heard one, and I don't remember who that was. But really, there's no reason why we can't do this now. There's no reason why we couldn't do it last year or the year before last, or 8 years ago, or 4 years ago.
Done what in particular?
Invest in the after-school programs, invest in youth engagement, right? It's not rocket science. Everybody talks about it, but nobody has implemented it. And when they do implement it, it is at such a small amount that it really doesn't have the impact that it could be having.
You mentioned that the candidates are all progressive for the most part, right? Or they say they are. Now, Vallis has taken some heat lately because he's being called a Republican in
Well, he
Democratic
said that.
clothing. Right, but he's also in his commercial says he's a lifelong Democrat.
Yeah.
But my question is, do you think Lightfoot wants to face Vallis in the runoff? Because if there is a clear difference between two candidates, it's probably him and her.
Well, what I would say, if I was Lightfoot, I would not want to be in a runoff, period, end of story. Win outright.
Well, no one's, the chances of that
That's not
happening are
gonna
slim,
happen.
right?
Well, it could happen.
You think somebody could get 50%?
No.
+1.
Yeah.
That's
Wow.
Well, you asked if I were in her shoes. That's what I would
Well,
want.
that's what you would want.
That's what I would want.
But I frankly think, given the polling results that we're seeing and the shifts, I think it could be any one of the combination of either the top three for sure.
Vallis, Garcia, Lightfoot.
I don't think it's a guarantee that Lightfoot will make the runoff anymore. That I think we were even thinking 30 days ago that she would. I think it could be Vallis and Garcia.
But I think
it
you
could be
also-
Lightfoot and Vallis. I think it could be Garcia.
I
and
still say
Lightfoot.
don't. I was somewhere and talking in a department store, and I was talking to the salesperson, and somebody like, oh, did you say, blah, 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 and I'm from such and such a ward, and I'm thinking about the mayor. And so what they have said to me are some of the ones that aren't
Right.
up on air, and I think you can't take away the female factor.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot take that out of the race, and so now you have Alderman King
Right.
up on air.
Sure, running commercials
A
now.
lot of, but people that actually listen, just like I said, that listen to Cam Buckner, that listen to Rod Sawyer, they like what they're hearing. It's just not up on air.
Right.
Well, can we agree on this though? What is going to make the decision in this election is voter turnout.
Yes.
And where the undecided swing. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, what we don't know, given still the number of voters. In our poll, about 10 or 11% said that they were still totally undecided and had no idea who they're going to vote for, even when we really pressed them.
And if we go
Right.
back 4 years ago, the Mayor Lightfoot was not on anybody's radar.
Right.
Right.
She was
exactly.
polling at 1% or whatever that number was.
3%.
But she
polling
won the
very
Lakeshore
low.
Liberals, which was key for her,
Yeah.
and that's going to be a bigger challenge this time.
That's
Well, no,
definitely gonna
but
be a
that's
bigger challenge.
but my point is that before the election, we did not know that, right?
Yeah.
Because all of the polls, everything said Preckwinkle, Preckwinkle, Preckwinkle.
Right.
And that is not what it was at all.
All right. We're running tight on time. Give us one quick question,
Okay.
and then I have a final follow-up.
This poll was also really encouraging for Black-Brown coalition building, and that the majority of Black and Brown voters say that Blacks and Latinos have a lot to gain by working together, and there are preferences of working together, and that we have more in common than we don't.
Okay. Final question here for you. We need to wrap. Of all of the candidates who are perceived likely not to move through, to your point, Leslie, which of them are you most impressed with and people should take a look at if they're undecided?
I think all of them are worth taking a look at.
Okay.
I think they all are worth taking a look at.
How about you, Sylvia?
Yeah, I'm going to agree. I mean, I'm going to go back to my friend who's not in the weeds, and she's just said they were all incredibly impressive. They're all incredibly creative. They all had really good ideas for how to move our city forward.
Let me try
and to me, that's the hope of Chicago, and that we have these 9 candidates, most whom I think we'd agree, all care deeply and passionately about this city,
Right.
and are going to do their best regardless of who wins the race.
Let me try to ask it a different way.
You're not going to get it.
We're not going there.
Beyond the 4 we've talked about, if there's one candidate we shouldn't count out, who would that be in your mind?
I still think it's still a race for all of them. I
Okay.
really do.
Well, I would say it's Wilson because he, in terms of polling, I think he consistently polls fourth.
Right. Well,
Right.
he was. What did he
And-
have? 14? He had 13%, I think, in your poll?
Yeah. He
All
was
right.
a 13%
12.
in our poll, and
He had 12, yeah.
12 or 13% in the poll, which is I think where he's been in other polls. So, so I would not count him out, right? I mean, he does have a base constituency that he's been cultivating for a very long time. And when you have a race this tight with these many candidates who are all credible candidates, I think it really is a toss-up to see who the final two are going to be.
And you know, just to talk about Wilson, I do believe that his numbers have gone up each time he has run. So this is his, what, fourth or fifth run for mayor. So the numbers have gradually gone up.
He's done well in your ward, for sure. South Shore down 4, 5, 6. He's done well. And I think he won 7 or 8 wards, maybe more, in 2019. So he's definitely one to keep an eye on.
Yes.
We'll see. Thank you, ladies, very much. Look forward to, I think we're going to do this again next week just to catch up a week out from the election. And we look forward to having you on election night as well. Always fun to have your insights. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us on CBS Chicago. Stay with us for coverage leading up to the election and on election night, February 28th. In addition to our newscasts on television, you'll find more information on our website, too, cbschicago.com, and on our digital streaming network, CBS News Chicago. We'll see you soon.